What kind of economic systems are best at allowing us to exercise the fact that we are created in the image and likeness of God?
Now keep in mind that if you take tiny steps towards any goal, it's just a matter of when you're going to reach it.
Scarcity is the first lesson of economics. Now, the first lesson of politics is to forget the first lesson of economics.
If you don't provide real, actual value to people in exchange for the money that you're asking for in return, you will lose over time.
We can see the economy as a social web that God has created for people to serve each other with their work.
We have the Word of God that provides for us a foundation for knowledge, for truth, for beauty, for goodness, for dignity and value in human beings. We have the Word of God that provides for us things like this. Ready? Thou shalt not steal.
Ethics on the legitimacy of wealth and entrepreneurship individually. Secondly, postmillennial eschatology, that is, the kingdom of God expands across the earth before Jesus comes back in final judgment. And the link to get those two together is the idea of the pursuit of self-interest leading to widespread economic growth and social transformation.
The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down, and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness, and man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. Welcome back to another episode of Christ in Capital, the show that wants to encourage you to love God, love neighbor, and build something. I'm the host, Dustin Johnson, and it's Reformation Day. I don't think I'm supposed to put like time markers in my episodes because actually I'm not sure why that's the case. Maybe that's not even the case. I just heard it somewhere. Maybe fake news. But anyways, Nathan, what's up? How are you doing?
Hey, happy Reformation Day.
Thanks,
I'm excited to talk about Ecclesiastes on a day like today.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited. I think we're going to be, so for the listeners, we're going to be talking about two different topics, and I think they kind of might go hand in hand, maybe. There might be a connection somewhere, but there is a connection between Reformation Day and the social media discussion we're going to have. Do you know where I'm going with that? You might not.
No, unless you're talking about nailing the 95 Theses was kind of like on the Wittenberg door. It was kind of like a social media post that changed the world.
Oh, that's not where I was going. But yeah, it's the first posting on someone's wall, right?
Yeah, exactly. A literal wall.
Yeah.
And it went viral.
It the most viral post that has ever happened. That's right. No, that's not where I was going, but that's awesome. I'm glad you pulled that out. I was just going for the the idea of information becoming like widely available and that influencing the world in that way with Gutenberg's printing press and all of that.
True.
And now we're in a situation where it's almost reverse, but we'll get into that in a little bit. But yeah, I'm excited about this episode. We're going to be talking about Ecclesiastes. So, Nathan, I was reading Ecclesiastes this week, and I'm like, I guess I was a little confused. I think Ecclesiastes is one of those books that it just upends a lot of stuff. When you think you've got a grasp on what the Bible is and what the scriptures are and what they're supposed to do or supposed to be and how we're supposed to understand them, Ecclesiastes just kind of like throws all that in the wood chipper.
Yeah.
So we've talked in the past about the different like genres of scripture, the different books, how you're supposed to take certain books in certain ways and they apply to your life in the way that the author would intend that they apply to your life. So you would take like maybe narratives. Don't apply specifically like a rule book, right? You don't read something in a narrative and say, oh, look what happened in the scriptures. Let me apply it that way to my life. Not necessarily. But there are other places where we've got books that focus on how you should live your life, how you should conduct, ethically and morally in all areas of life. And I think that's part of like rightly dividing the word. But
Right.
I'm reading Ecclesiastes, and none of that is clear, right? There's this internal monologue, it seems like, that this guy is going through, where it's like schizophrenic almost. And he's got so many different thoughts going on. It's like right out of the gate, it's depressive or depressing. But then he has little glimmers of hope mixed in there about, God's purpose for us in our work and in life and all of this. But it's couched in this language of how everything's purposeless and meaningless, and everything's just vain, and there's nothing new under the sun. And you're a pastor, you're a preacher, you're a theologian. So I want to get your take. How should we be taking Ecclesiastes? Like what's the main point?
Yeah, that's great. So I think it's good to preface that how to interpret Ecclesiastes is one of the biggest debates among theologians, even like conservative theologians who believe in the inerrancy and inspiration of the word, still debate whether or not Solomon is somebody that we should listen to and follow here, or whether or not it's describing a kind of a perspective that you don't want to have.
Okay.
Because if you remember in the Old Testament, Solomon began his reign with wisdom, but then he ended his reign with folly.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got Proverbs, which is a lot of kind of the early wisdom, but then here he's describing a lot of his folly, right?
Yeah.
I went after, sex. I went after food. I went after building projects. I went after all these things. And so some people interpret this as kind of this is the flip side of Proverbs. This is what happens when you become the fool, sort of thing. I don't agree with that, though.
Okay.
So the way I interpret this is actually similar to Doug Wilson has a great commentary called Joy at the End of the Tether. And another good commentary on it is John Currid's commentary on Ecclesiastes. Those two I find I resonate with the most in interpreting this. So, but I wanted to throw that out as a precursor, that what I think is not necessarily the definitive word on Ecclesiastes. There are other, I think, good and persuasive accounts. But the way I take Ecclesiastes, we got to remember it's in the wisdom literature genre.
Yeah.
And with wisdom literature, often it's dealing with human experience in everyday life or under the sun. It's not necessarily focused on what's God doing up in the heavens, right? Or how is God orchestrating things, or what's our transcendent theological perspective on this, but it's human experience under the sun. So, and what it's doing is it's trying to show the limitations of life when you only live under the sun. So it's descriptive in that this is how the human heart finds dissatisfaction when it tries to squeeze out of created things more than creative things are able to give. So that's why you see this flip-flop. On the one hand, he says food, drink, sex, work, prestige, dissatisfying, vanity, just chasing after the wind.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And it doesn't satisfy.
Mm-hmm.
But then he, like you were saying, he then pauses and then he considers God. He goes above the sun. And then he says, but God gives food as a gift, so enjoy it. God gives you the wife, so enjoy the wife of your youth. God gives you work, so whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might.
Yeah.
And he goes through the list of all the things that he's dissatisfied with, and then he says, all right, now you need to find satisfaction in it. And you're like, well, wait, which is it? And the difference is, on the one hand, when you live under the sun, when you shut God out of the picture, when you're only trying to eke joy, happiness, and satisfaction out of life without reference to God, you'll wind up empty.
Yeah.
But when you recognize the limitations of those things for ultimate satisfaction, and then you recognize that those are gifts that God has given you, you can actually enjoy them. And so I find the book incredibly hopeful.
Yeah. Yep.
The book is essentially saying, look, you know that kind of underlying restlessness you have, that underlying emptiness, the underlying feeling of dissatisfaction? That's because you're trying to get out of life something that it can't give you on its own. But you can find joy and satisfaction and enjoyment in life and in those things, but as gifts from God once you recognize their limitations.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm thinking about this, and you kind of couple this book together with the other wisdom books like Proverbs, and you get this, like in Proverbs, you get a kind of a systematic approach to how you should conduct yourself, and it uses a lot of marketplace analogies or kind of illustrations, where the wise man does this, and he who is wise will do this thing, or it's very if this then that. It's really systematic. But there's also proverbs peppered in there where it's like, hey, the rain falls on the just and the unjust, right? It's not necessarily do this and everything's gonna be fine. And then Ecclesiastes kind of turns that up to like 11, and it says,
right.
Look, you know what? Just because you do all these things, do things well, doesn't mean you're going to be happy. I think there are passages in Ecclesiastes, and maybe I'm getting this mixed up with Proverbs, but it's basically saying, good and evil happen to both
Right.
just and unjust, or the good and the evil. Bad things happen to everyone, right? And there's not this correlation between obedience to God necessarily and immediate satisfaction or immediate like reward, right? This is not a genie in the bottle kind of thing,
Right.
which I think destroys the whole like prosperity gospel thing,
Right.
because that's not it. It's not obey God, and your life's going to be good. In fact, in some instances, obey God and your life actually might get worse. I mean, that's possible. But the Apostle Paul is probably a good example of that. But I think it's super hopeful in that no matter how that all plays out, if you get yourself like the author of this book says, over the sun. Look, ultimately there is satisfaction. There is reconciliation. There is peace with God, despite all other things that happen in your life that may be negative or put you down. So yeah, that I think is super hopeful. Have you heard the song, or do you know who Shane and Shane is?
Yeah.
Have you heard the song "Over the Sun"? I think it's called "Over the Sun."
No, I haven't.
Yeah, they got a song that's really cool. It starts out kind of solemn and gloomy, but the verse it's like it basically says there's nothing new under the sun. I'm depressed, blah blah blah, and the verse is "Get over the sun," essentially. That's a really good song. I might tag that in the show notes, maybe. But okay, so since we're talking about Christ and capital, what do you think is kind of the takeaway for business people? Like, how do you? I know we've kind of said that it's not this like, hey, do this kind of book, but what do you think is the application, if there is any, for businessmen or people who are working in the marketplace, for like those specific verses that say, hey, God designed you to find joy in your toil, in your work. Yeah. What's your kind of thoughts about that?
Yeah, I got a couple thoughts. One is the whole book, like you've been saying, seems to kind of tell the reader, hey, look, temper your expectations on what is going to happen in life. Life is uncertain, and you can't control it no matter how hard you try. And if you try to find your ultimate joy in it, it'll leave you destitute. Okay? So temper your expectations, and there are going to be seasons of plenty and seasons of want. There are going to be seasons of war, seasons of peace. That's just how it works, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the first application is when you're a business person in the marketplace, you got to realize, look, I'm doing business in a crooked world, right? What is crooked cannot be made straight. I got to temper my expectations. There will always be things outside of my control that heavily influence whether or not I do well in business or in my work, right? I mean, this is why the markets have been going up and down like crazy in 2020.
Right.
Nobody predicted that there would be a worldwide pandemic, right? And then we're looking to our politicians, and it's these people who we elected years ago in the Senate and the House of Representatives who are making decisions now that affect businesses everywhere, and nobody can do anything about it, right? We're just kind of sitting there seeing what they're going to do.
Right.
There are so many factors that are outside of our control, and so temper your expectations and get small. I think this is one of the key takeaways from Ecclesiastes is get small. When you try to get too big, when you try to accumulate wealth for the rest of your life, or when you try to feed not only the hunger you have today, but the hunger you're going to have for the years to come, you've gotten too big, it's outside of your control, and you're going to be disappointed. But you can get small. You can find enjoyment in the work today.
Yeah. And
you can trust the future to God, right?
Yeah.
And actually, I think this is it's a freeing perspective on work, because it says, look, ultimately, the measure of success for your work is not how much you can accumulate. It's not your profits. There are some things you can do to try to increase your profits or try to build your portfolio or try to XYZ, but too much of that's outside of your control. The measure of success for your work is the day-to-day enjoyment that you get out of it as a gift from the Lord. And maybe your business will only last 5 years, and then look, it didn't work out, and you go and try something else. But did you find enjoyment in those day-to-day things? And if you didn't, then you're left with nothing. But if you did, even if the business venture doesn't work out, even if you got to do something else, even if your portfolio isn't where you wanted it to be, you've still found meaning in it. You've still found joy in it as a gift from the Lord.
Right. Yeah, it's the purpose and the finding the meaning in it all, I think is huge. Yeah, I'm not gonna try to summarize it, because I think you just basically hit the nail on the head. It's a good analogy for today. But yeah, so like, just I think people, especially Christians, we think, hey, if I just do these good things in my business, if I do this, then things are going to go well for me. And that's not always the case. I think God intends for us to just be faithful. Find your joy in the day-to-day work. Small acts of faithfulness every day, consistently and persistently, building for, I've heard this saying before, and I don't remember who says it, but you should be building for the day that you will never see. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that Christians have that non-Christians don't. The idea that you can just, you can leave a legacy for your kids, but you should be building, investing in the world now for things that will last long after you're gone. And that requires you to find joy in what you're doing now, so that you don't get burnt out on your work, and you just kind of throw your hands up at the end of the day or at the end of your life and just like, I'm done with this, right? You can hand it down to your kids, and you can say, look, raising your kids up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, and then hand them your business. And I think that's awesome. I think that's beautiful. That's why I don't think all this stuff about Well, maybe nepotism is a bad thing, or maybe generational wealth, it gets kind of a bad connotation or a bad rap, but it shouldn't. We should want to build for our kids,
Right, absolutely.
and hand down to them, and give them a better starting point than we had. That should be common sense. But anyways, but just know it's not going to always be, hey, obey God, do what He says, and things will go well for you. It's not necessarily the case. But there's joy
Right.
and hope when you get, quote, over the sun.
Right. When you get over the sun, and when you get to the end of the tether, which is how Doug Wilson puts it, is that the tether is kind of the thing that limits you, right?
Yeah.
And we don't, as Americans, we don't like limitations, but actually recognizing your limitations, setting your expectations, knowing how far these, your earthly work or food and drink or relationships can get you. You go to the end of the tether, and then you enjoy that,
Yeah.
You enjoy an evening with friends. You enjoy playing with your kids. You enjoy doing whatever it is you do with all of your might. You enjoy these as gifts from God for today. They're not there to satisfy you tomorrow. They're only there as a gift to enjoy today.
Right.
And if you go and you to the end of the tether and you recognize those limitations, and you do that every day for your whole life, that's a pretty good life.
Yeah.
Yep.
And if you keep it focused on that, on the small day-to-day, it's like how I read books. I read like 5 pages a day, just every day. Just set a goal. Just read 5 pages or 10 pages, and before you know it, you've read a book, and it wasn't overwhelming. It didn't burn you out.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Seriously. So, I think kind of a good summary verse or chunk of verses in Ecclesiastes hits at what we're talking about. In chapter 11, it says, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth, and if a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. He who observes the wind will not sow. He who regards the clouds will not reap. As you do not know the way the Spirit comes to the bones in the womb of a woman with child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything. In the morning sow your seed, and at evening withhold not your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good." And then it says, "Light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. So if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all. But let him remember that the days of darkness will be many." So he's saying, look, life's uncertain. So enjoy what you can, but do your work. Trust God. You don't know the work that God's going to do one way or the other. And then he says, give a portion to 7 or even 8. Which I think means kind of the last admonition is be generous with what you have. Don't hoard up.
Right.
Because some people say, oh, yes, tomorrow's uncertain, so I'm going to hoard. And this says, no, tomorrow's uncertain, so give your portions to others. Cast your bread upon the waters. Be generous. And then in the time of calamity, people will take care of you. And this kind of strikes against that American individualism where not only do you need to do your work by yourself and you need to build yourself up from nothing, but also you need to always be the one providing for yourself because nobody else is going to look after you.
Right.
But if instead your investment to hedge off the uncertainty of tomorrow, if your investment is to be generous to others, then if the time of calamity comes, you will have a lot of people who are willing to hold you up.
Perfect. Wise words. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it there. Let it resonate. Meditate on that. Go read Ecclesiastes to everyone who has not. If you're listening to the show, I think you probably have, but maybe not. I don't know. Okay. So everyone go like and subscribe to the podcast. Click the notification bells on YouTube. I think YouTube is probably my favorite place for this podcast. But yeah, go listen to it. Go share it with a friend. Share it on social media. Speaking of social media, that's what we're going to get into next. So until next time, go love God, love neighbor, and build something. Talk to you guys later. Bye.